Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network. I'm your co-host Dallas King, and with me as always is the Noah Segan to my Ryan Johnson. It's Lee Hutchison. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I thought maybe being based in Edinburgh I'd be a southern gentleman, but I'll take that.
No, exactly. So on today's show we have a quirky culinary double bill as we peel back the layers on Glass Onion and Knives Out Mystery before chewing the fat on Bones and All. Glass Onion sees the world's greatest detective, Benoit Blanc, invited to Greece to take part in a murder mystery party thrown by an eccentric tech billionaire. Yet for one person on the island, this is not a game. Written and directed by Ryan Johnson, starring Daniel Craig returning as Benoit Blanc, Janelle Monáe, Edward Norton, Leslie Odom Jr., Catherine Hahn, Jessica Henwick, Madeline Klein, with Kate Hudson and Dave Bautista. This is another star-studded murder mystery from the makers of Knives Out. Lee, were you looking forward to this one?
Yeah, I was, to be honest. I've kind of kept myself in a bubble with this film, and I was really looking forward to it. It's one of those ones, like, maybe my expectations aren't high for these movies, but I feel like I'm guaranteed a good time. And Knives Out was one of the most sort of rewatchable kind of movies of that year. And, I had flashbacks to the film at sort of London Film Festival of, I think we were all seeing a pretty terrible film at the time. I think it was it Greed?
Greed was indeed the one that we, it's like, do you spend 2 hours queuing for Knives Out, or do you just go see the film that's on at 8:30 and then join the back of the queue and then get in? And that's what we decided to do. And yeah, it was that. I'm not sure if it ever really got a full release, but it was kind of like a fake version of the guy who ran Topshop and Top Man into the ground.
Yeah, so I remember just thinking back to that, the excitement. I remember how nervous you were of like, oh, I might not be guaranteed it. And I'm trying to be reassuring of like, and I also remembered it being one of the most half-empty screenings in the morning because I think everyone was banking on going to see Knives Out. So it's one of those films like, I've been looking forward to it, and, I think what's going to be what I'm happy about is that it got a cinema release. Like, I was determined that I wouldn't be watching this film for the first time on Netflix, so I was looking forward to like a good time. I had my ticket for weeks now, to be honest, which was really kind of rare for a film like this. You usually think of original films, it's the week before that the tickets go on sale. With this, it's been sitting in my little Cineworld app for a good few weeks, and no, I was looking forward to it, and it's been kind of, I think I'd been aware of sort of some of the reactions from London and from some other film festivals, and just being like, oh, there's a lot of buzz about this film, and I did not doubt that I would have a really good time.
Yep, so yeah, this is the, I guess, a sequel in some ways to Knives Out, although it's billed as a Knives Out mystery, which is interesting because I would have potentially called it Glass Onion a Benoit Blanc mystery, because, the murder mystery was called Knives Out, yet this is a continuation of the character as opposed to the story that played out in Knives Out. And so we get the turning of Benoit Blanc. But, this was a film which, I don't think was expected to do huge numbers. But, it had a budget of $40 million and then did a worldwide gross of $313 million. So clearly there was like, wow, this is a hit. We need to get another one. We need to get moving on this. Murder mysteries seem to be very in at the moment, so we'll go all in. And then, for better or worse, Netflix stepped in and purchased the rights to well, not the rights, but essentially bankrolled Ryan Johnson in making his series of films. I think they bought it for around about $450 million, which seems incredible given the current cinematic outlook and whatever. But I think they did this just before COVID, and as anyone who's seen Glass Onion or goes to see Glass Onion will realise that this film was made during COVID. What did you make of Netflix involvement? Because, as you said, this one has got a cinematic release, although a limited window. It's having a very short 1 week release, I believe, in America, despite the fact it is only released on 600 screens and only open for a very short amount of time. It will debut at number 3 in the box office, which suggests that, if it had had a full rollout, we would have been looking at the number 1 film over Thanksgiving weekend. Netflix, do you think it was a good choice, a bad choice, or...
The people have kind of... there's been a lot of discussion and debate about this of like, why wouldn't Netflix leave it in cinemas for more than a week? Get it in there for a good couple of weeks, go from there. And, they're going to make lots of money and people are going to really enjoy it. And, that's true, but that's not the reality with this film. I think someone made a great point that's online of going like, Rian Johnson and Daniel Craig knew what they were getting. I mean, they have got, Netflix haven't just bought the rights. These two guys have got a huge payday deal out of it. And, that's great for them. That's the reality for some of these people. So, I like that it's got that sort of 1 week kind of exclusivity to it. It makes it a bit of fun. There was a bit that got me most excited about it, and I felt the need to point out to my girlfriend when we were sitting down watching the film yesterday, was like, oh, look down there, there's old people coming into the cinema screen, like, and she was like, oh, kind of, why is that an exciting thing? And I was like, because we need those crowds in to make kind of cinemas last. I mean, when I went to see Black Panther last week, it was a sort of quieter audience, I think, not helped by there being a million kind of showings, but, we need those audiences to come out, and a film like Knives Out kind of appeals to so many generations as well. And it's going to be there on Netflix and come Christmas time, and I think it'll be a popular hit then, and it's going to be one of these Netflix movies that you guarantee will be a genuine success. Not X people watched 1,000 odd minutes of it over a period of time. So I was really excited to see that this crowd were turning up, and it wasn't like it's selling out. And it's not just people going, oh, I'll catch it on Netflix, I'll catch it on streaming. I know streaming is definitely playing a part in damaging our cinemas right now, but it seems to me like that's a really positive sign that, the two can coexist. And I think, what was it, Matilda was also out yesterday as well. So kind of Netflix probably, I know they don't really release their box offices, so they don't get into the top 10s or whatever in the UK certainly, but I would suspect those would be probably within the top 3 each of the opening of the box office in the UK.
I think I did hear a rumour that may be changing soon. I believe that Netflix are, I think they're quietly confident in their film's box office potential, so I believe we may see them chart. Certainly in America, I think Knives Out will officially chart in the top 3, so that's going to be interesting to see. And I mean, I understand, obviously, the strategy behind it, in that, get it in theaters for a week. Some people will see this as, an event cinema, essentially, must, I've got to go see it in the cinema. If I don't see it this week, then I'm only going to be able to see it on the small screen. But what it does is it gets people talking, it generates buzz, and then by the time the buzz sort of reaches its peak, it's like, oh, we're not allowed in cinemas. However, you can sign up to Netflix, and then you can watch it at Christmas. I think it releases on December the 23rd. So essentially, what they've got here is an alternative holiday flick. They've got something that's been enjoyed by families in America over Thanksgiving, and then will now be enjoyed over Christmas as well, as you all can sit at home and sort of watch the film and sort of, I guess, whodunit, essentially. I mean, and actually, it's probably fair to say that actually, given how Netflix normally promote a lot of their films, which is, can sometimes, there's no rhyme or reason as to which films get pushed and which films don't. There's many films which apparently drop on Netflix, and I'm definitely going to watch that film, but I load up my Netflix and it takes me about 2 or 3 minutes to actually search through the different menus to find the film that I'm looking for, as opposed to you think it would just be right there when you open it up, but it's not. But this one has had a fair marketing push as well, so maybe Netflix model is starting to change. I guess we'll have to see how it moves in the future. But so were you excited by the return of Mr. Benoit Blanc, given that you were obviously a huge James Bond fan? I'm going to ask you, as a Bond fan, some of the other actors who have played James Bond have sometimes struggled to step out of the shadow of that iconic character. I think personally it's fair to say that Daniel Craig has done enough to show that he will not always be known as James Bond. I think he's got another new character that can run and run, of course, a series of films. But I think he's shown enough range in other projects such as Logan Lucky and stuff like that he is the real deal, isn't he?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the thing with Daniel Craig is, and probably gets into some of the discourse that's been going around this week, is that he is a movie star. He is someone that, you kind of go out of your way to go, oh, a new Daniel Craig project, because he chooses them quite rarely and so on. I think, he's obviously had his Bond commitments, and now he's in that period of like, what's he going to branch out and do? He's done stage, he's done comedy. He's definitely got a range. I'm looking forward to seeing what like his next maybe like enduring love or drama picture that he does. But Daniel Craig, you didn't get the chance to show it too often in the James Bond films, but he is a funny man. As you mentioned, Logan Lucky, he was outstanding in that, and I think I really enjoyed that performance in Knives Out. So he's one of those people I just really enjoy, and I really like that kind of character as well. And I felt that this film did the right thing that sequels should do sometimes, is like, okay, what did people enjoy about the first one about this kind of character? So we'll give them some of that, but equally that we're going to expand upon the kind of character and add some new touches and flares. And I certainly felt like I knew more of this about this man in this film than I did kind of going into the next one, which going into this one, which was really good.
Yeah, he's kept his southern sort of foghorn leghorn accent. I know that at one point Rian Johnson was considering having him do a different accent in each film for no particular reason. I think he did. I don't know if it was a joke or not, but I did read it somewhere that he wondered about whether it was just like an accent he was putting on to maybe lure the people he was talking to a false sense of security or something like that. But he is a Southern belle, as it were, truly delightful. But of course, the detective is only as good as the foil, as the people that he is up against, and he's invited to this murder mystery weekend on the private island of Miles Braun, played by Edward Norton, who is a tech billionaire who has a small group of friends who have known each other for years. They are disruptors. We've got a governor, we've got a scientist, we've got a influencer, a Twitch streamer, and his former partner at the firm who left under acrimonious circumstances. I mean, what did you make of the makeup of this group and the actors involved? Was it an all-star cast for you?
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? I think it's one of those ones. It didn't bother me as such. Like, it's probably similar almost to the first one. Is just because you've got this big name cast or well known faces, not all of them are going to be like the leading actors or characters, and some that I thought were getting a little bit short shifted. Became a bit more prevalent in sort of the second half. But I thought Edward Norton in particular was excellent, and people like Catherine Hahn. I think obviously gaining more and more popularity in the past few years and so on. And you think, I think her and Kate Hudson will play large roles, or perhaps the same with Dave Bautista. But they're very much there as supporting actors. The thing with Knives Out and this kind of big casts of things and so on is not all of them can be the lead. There's something fun to be said about being the supporting kind of character and actor. So I thought it was pretty well done myself. I would have liked to have seen more of some of them, but sometimes it's nice to be left wanting more. It doesn't mean that that's what it should be.
Yeah, no, I mean, I always every film should always have more Catherine Hahn, I think, in my opinion. And, obviously this is a murder mystery, so someone's got to die. No spoilers here, but I think it's safe to say that if you look at the cast list, anyone with a with or an and at the start of the film is perhaps maybe not going to see as much screen time as others in the thing. So one thing that this film does, which is a potentially risky strategy. I think any film that sort of acknowledges COVID or places it front and center in the plot is then potentially risking dating itself quite highly. What did you make of the reason, the sort of how that sort of played into the first part of the film? You know, essentially Benoit Blanc is housebound because of COVID and struggling to, you know, his mind is not being used for what it's meant to be, and he just needs this new big case, and then, you know, a box arrives at his door, and then he's off. I mean, what did you make of that?
I thought I was quite fine with it. You know, there's always a thing with comedy. There's always a risk some things will be dated. I mean, I think back to some of the, you know, the references perhaps in that sort of first movie, for example. I mean, things about sort of Hamilton and sort of the political kind of landscape at the time. Yeah, it maybe dates it a little bit, you know, adds a bit of humor, but, you know, not all of these things can be in a sort of a bubble to an extent and so on. I mean, ultimately this film does feel pretty universal and so on. You know, I imagine in a bunch of years' time people will still get a lot from it. But, you know, it was just a little nod and a wink really to sort of COVID. I think once they get onto the island, it's really all forgotten about, bar one line of someone going, "Oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble for coming to an island during a pandemic." You know, I thought it was going to, the way they were sort of leaning into it in those first few minutes, I thought, oh, it's going to play a bigger role than perhaps I expected. But actually it kind of worked out pretty well, I thought.
Yeah, no, the only thing was when I watched it a second time, I was sort of thinking, but May 2020, that was quite early on in the pandemic, and then, but wouldn't Greece have been under tighter restrictions? How could they just rock up and stay in a hotel the night before? And I was going, that was sort of when I was like, so then, yeah, that bit did take me out of it in those scenes. But yeah, like you say, once they're on the island, you kind of sort of get past all that and you get into the real sort of meaty part of the script. And I mean, for you, did you feel that the murder mystery element sort of played out? You know, we've had a few, you know, we've had Death on the Nile, we've had Bodies, 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 we've had sort of See How They Run. You know, I mean, how did this one sort of stack up in a quite an expansive year for this type of film?
I thought it kind of did it pretty well. I mean, it's one of those ones. I'm never one of those people kind of trying to guess, oh, where's it going to go? There's the odd little moment where I think, oh, I just noticed that there. But I try and let these sorts of things wash over me and not be like trying to get bogged down and maybe what I did in Inherent Vice back in the day of trying to make it all make sense to an extent. So, you know, I just sort of go, right, I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to go on the journey and so on and not play, you know, essentially, you know, Clue to an extent with what's kind of unfolding in front of me. And, you know, I always liked how there was bits where all I ask of a film like this is I'm not going to be trying to guess where this whole film's going to go, but what I am going to do is I want it to be get to the end and go, that makes sense. I don't want it to be these things where I'm necessarily going, oh my God, I never saw that coming. You know, oh, how did they do that? Oh, that makes no sense, but that's a great twist, as it were. I want it to go and go, oh, that has been fully constructed and put together. And I must admit, there's a bit towards sort of almost the middle of the film where I thought, oh, this is actually wrapping up really, really very quickly. And then it just sort of pulls the rug on you and sort of gives you a sort of a different perspective, which I thought was a really kind of clever way to differentiate between that and the first one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for you, yeah, it works in terms of its sort of delivery. And I think because one of the most important elements for me, I think, in a murder mystery is it's that scene where, you know, it's building towards a scene where the detective gathers everyone into a room and then explains how it's done. And I think you're exactly right in that it's at that point is you can't cheat the audience in sort of throwing a curveball in having the killer be someone that it's like, there's no possible way that could have done. You know, it needs to, like I say, it needs to make logical sense, but still have enough of a surprise that you go, oh, right. And then you go, okay, yeah, no, but looking back on it, it's like, because I've now seen the film twice, and I think it's a film like this is one, you know, it's a good film when you can watch it a second time and you see, I suppose, you know, the whole Shrek and Glass Onion sort of thing. You peel back the layers, and yet what's underneath makes total sense. And I think that's what Rian Johnson has done very, very well in both of these films. Is he has never forgotten that, you know, this is a whodunit, and is always thinking about plot and pacing and throwing in little bits here and there that all makes sense when you look at it as a whole. Once you peel back every single layer of the onion, you put it out, laid in front of you, and you go, yes, that is still an onion, so to speak. Perhaps that's but maybe a terrible analogy, but that's what I'm going with just now. So I mean, in terms of sort of cast standouts, were there any in particular for you? I mean, I think the one that has most people talking about is Janelle Monáe. In this, for obvious reasons that maybe we don't want to go into too much, but she's certainly one of the most intriguing characters in this one. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to talk about because it, to do it almost plays the sort of the second half of the film. But I thought she was excellent in it. She was one of these kind of characters. I think it's not a spoiler to say you're watching it going, oh, I'm wanting more of her in that sort of first half of the film. She's a bit of a spectre to an extent at this party, but I was desperate for more of her, and this for me this was my first real kind of like, seeing what kind of talent she is. I've seen her in things like sort of Hidden Figures, and obviously she played a small role in I think it was Moonlight, wasn't it? But I'm not too familiar with her at all, and so on. So she was definitely one of these sorts of standout kind of actors where you're like, oh, I can't wait to see what she does next, and hopefully will mean more sort of starring roles for her.
Yeah, no, I thought she was very good. I thought Kate Hudson was fantastic as Birdie J. It was great to see her in role. Is Dave Bautista, I think, is cementing himself as, I know I'm a huge fan of Dwayne The Rock Johnson, but I'm going to go in line and Dave is probably the best wrestler turned actor out there at the moment. I think he has shown a huge amount of range, whereas maybe Dwayne The Rock Johnson is someone similar to like Ryan Reynolds, in which he has found a lane and he's very much sticking to that lane. Whereas I think Batista has got a lot more strings in his bow and is willing to take sort of a lot of chances with his performances.
You're 100% correct. I was very much thinking that. I attempted to start watching Black Adam last week, and I must admit I only got about an hour or so in, and I just found it really unwatchable to be honest with you. And it was almost watching it where it's like Dave Bautista is picking interesting projects. It's not always perhaps the starring man. He might be the supporting kind of actor, but he is really carving a thing for himself. I mean, could you imagine The Rock, for example, just doing that sort of 5-10 minute scene in a Blade Runner film? No. I mean, for a period of time, I mean, the Rock had the opportunity, almost that Pain and Gain, to start picking sort of interesting kind of options and going from there, but he's never really sort of followed through with that, has he? And Dave Bautista, it's like, oh, I'm excited to see what he does next, and he has got a range that The Rock doesn't have whatsoever, and The Rock has become a bit of a disappointment. He's just someone that is just very much interested in sort of his brand, and I just think he's incredibly risk averse, to be honest, and he's becoming a bit of a pain, to be honest. I mean, some of his comments about the Black Adam box office has been bordering on the absolute weird as well.
Yeah, no, it's a shame because like you say, at the beginning of his career, he got a lot of pushback on is it right to be playing the character he played in Be Cool, which was a gay bodyguard and stuff like that. That was like a huge risk at the beginning of his career. Southland Tales, very much different in terms of his performance to what he is leaning towards now. And this is just going a bit of a side tangent from what we're talking about with Glass Onion, that, but like similar to Ryan Reynolds, who someone who at one time was doing performances like Buried or The Voices, and very much nowadays is very much Ryan Reynolds, the brand that you see in his public life and everything. It's like I would like to see these guys. Surely you have built up enough cash reserves and credibility that you can afford to take the odd challenging role and risk or something. One for them, one for me. I'd like to see these guys do more of that. And
I think Black Adam was his one for you.
Well, I guess, yeah.
Oh, sorry, one for him. Sorry, apologies.
One for him, yes. Well, he was all in as producer and all that. So, yeah, he has a lot at stake in that one. So one can maybe understand why he's so protective of it. But, yeah, he's done that one. Do something just a little bit different. But, hey, that's beside the point. Back to Glass Onion. what did you make of all the little minor celebrity cameos that we got in the film?
Less good, to be honest.
Less good, yeah. Were you not as impressed by Zoom calls featuring people and name dropping? I laughed more at the sort of name dropping of certain actors and their sort of branded products. I thought,
yeah, that was quite good. I like that, but it just became a bit like, for me, that dates things more than anything. Of like, I mean, I suppose I found the Jeremy Renner part particularly funny because, well, we all know about the Jeremy Renner app, which forever is one of these becomes memes that I always get a kick from. So no, that stuff I found a little dated to an extent, but I did enjoy seeing sort of like, some of them were pretty good with some, the perhaps when you see some of the roommates, for example, ping pong, you're like, oh, that's a good choice, or the Jeremy Renner one, but or Ethan Hawke going, oh, like, what are you doing here, and so on. Well, obviously he was filming nearby, but just little things like that where you just think it just dates it and takes you a little bit out of it. You're not getting to know these people perhaps as kind of characters at this stage, which is almost a bit more frustrating.
Yeah, no, the Ethan Hawke one was, I think, actually quite disappointing for me because I was aware of the cast list when it was announced, but I hadn't put the character names together. So when I'd heard that Ethan Hawke had spent like a day or so filming, a couple of days filming in Greece and stuff like that, I just assumed that he was the tech billionaire who was going to be killed, and then that's why he only needed to do a couple of days. I didn't realize that Edward Norton was that character. So in my head going into it, when he arrived in the car, I thought, oh, well, this is the guy, and then they're all going to go on the boat, and then he's going to get killed, and then and then it's like, oh, he's just delivering some weird sort of vaccination thing, and then he's off again. And I was like, is he going to come back later on? There's going to be a thing with him later on, right? Because it's Ethan Hawke. And then it was like, oh, it's not. I was like, oh well. It was just like hey, I want to. Rian Johnson seems like a cool guy. I want to work with him. I'm working on Moon Knight over in Turkey at the moment. Yeah, I'll just pop over for a couple of days and do that. And so yeah, I mean, it's like when you do get stars like that, you almost are expecting more from them. So them to just appear and then disappear was a bit disappointing. But other than that, I mean, we're not going to go into the reveal. We're not going to do a spoiler special on this one because it's only got a very limited theatrical window. I'm sure there's time to maybe revisit it after Christmas when everyone's got a chance to see it, but we don't want to ruin it for everyone. But where would you like to see the series go? Netflix will be all in on this. They've paid nearly $500 million for it. They're going to want more to come. So what would you like to see next for another adventure for Benoit Blanc?
I remember, how many of these are we getting at the currently?
I don't think they've actually announced. I think it's basically going to be, will they just continue doing them until they run out of steam? I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be curious about that. And I mean, they could do them for the rest of their life. I mean, you just have to maybe go every sort of, you might go 5 years, 10 years, but time, you've got things on your side, I think that could be interesting. It's one of those things, like, I think less sort of some of the sort of celebrity cameos would be my hope for the second one, but it's one of those ones I don't want to see. This one is going to be a big success. I don't want to see another Knives Out for maybe another 5 years or something like that. I want to keep it as event cinema. I want it to be one where everyone's looking forward to the new Knives Out movie. There's a bit of buzz coming out for it, and there's very few very few films or franchises at the moment where they have that excitement brand kind of going into it. I mean, there's obviously been a lot of talk about things like Star Wars, for example, of like the TV show has done very well, but are people excited for a new Star Wars movie? Where's the clamor for it, or the enthusiasm to get it done? I want to keep these things special. I want to see people excited to go see it and not feel like, oh, I've got to go see the new Knives Out. I want to keep something about this special, and because equally I want to see Rian Johnson and Daniel Craig do other interesting projects in and around the time that they have. I don't want to sort of sit in a few years and think I only know Daniel Craig from James Bond films and Knives Out films from the past decade or two.
I've actually looked up the deal. It is actually only 2 films. That is an insane amount of money for just 2 films. credit to Ryan Johnson and Daniel Craig's agents then, because I expect the majority of the money is probably filtered towards them.
I think it has.
So
It's moved them to a new house for sure.
Exactly, yeah. So, we will only see potentially one more. If they do, if this one does well and the third one does well and they want more, I guess that's another renegotiation. So fair play to them. But I'm assuming that Ryan Johnson, part of this deal is probably more or less full creative control over the product and stuff like that. Say what you want about The Last Jedi. I obviously was a huge fan of that. Some people were not.
Thank you.
I mean, that was a very tricky position that he was put in that he took a story and did his one, and yet he was not allowed to finish that story. Someone else came in and then basically went back on everything that he was trying to do. So, he has essentially probably got full creative control of this. He can do whatever he wants. And given, I think, the strength of these first 2 episodes, I don't have any worries about what we would see from Knives Out. Will it change in the format, in the fact that he normally teams up with one particular female sort of sidekick in order to help solve the mystery? I guess we will have to see. Maybe it'll be a male sidekick. Maybe it'll be like the Doctor, the Doctor who maybe his sidekick exchange and stuff like that. But I think based off these two, I'm very excited to see the return of Benoit Blanc. Like you say, probably in a sort of couple of years, make it a sort of an event, make people really want to and be excited for it rather than just sort of throw it away for any particular reason. And like you say, hopefully these Knives Out films also do not stop Johnson and Daniel Craig from seeing other projects, as long as perhaps it's not based in the Star Wars universe, perhaps, of which they both were in. Very, very briefly, anyway.
And whatever happened to that Ryan Johnson Star Wars trilogy that we're going to get as well?
Well, I don't think we're going to get that. And, I mean, as much as I enjoyed Last Jedi, I'm kind of glad that he's not maybe doing that and he can work on his own things. So there we go. Bones and All, directed by Luca Guadagnino, with a screenplay by David Kajnik, based on the novel by Camille De Angelis. It stars Taylor Russell, Timothy Chalamet, and Mark Rylance. Whilst many have dubbed this as the sexy Timothy Chalamet cannibal movie, Luca Guadagnino himself has called it a movie about love, a twisted coming-of-age story about 2 fine young cannibals. Now, I first saw this one at the Venice Film Festival, name-dropping my attendance at the Venice Film Festival. But Lee, for you, you've just basically seen it just a couple of hours ago. I mean, were you looking forward to this one? I mean, had you read much about it, and what was your sort of first impressions on leaving the cinema?
Well, it's one of those things. I just saw it just before we started this. I'm curious. This is, we'll consider this slightly breaking news at time of recording. But how much do you think this made at the US box office over the Thanksgiving weekend?
If rumors were correct, as of Friday, potentially under $5 million.
Yeah, 3.5 million. Probably pretty disappointing, but dare I say, probably in line with some of other films that Luca's kind of done. You don't expect. I think
it'd be a fair number for a Luca Guadagnino movie.
Yeah, and I mean, it's no reflection for me on the quality of these things. You just go, oh, well, that is what it is, kind of thing with films like this. I mean, I went to a 10 a.m. Sunday screening, and it was decently attended for a movie like this. I mean, I went to see Bigger Splash and there wasn't much people there, and how many people went to see Suspiria at cinemas, or how many people watched Call Me by Your Name but actually discovered it after the cinema. So these things are always a bonus if people turn up, but ultimately I was a bit mixed on it, to be honest. That all I knew kind of going in, and that was enough for me, was sort of I knew the cast, but equally I knew sort of it was a film about cannibalism. And that was enough for me. I wanted to be surprised. If the trailers have been on recently, I've kind of kept my head down. And, it was a bit of a mixed bag for me, to be honest. For when it was odd, disturbing, and intense, I was like, yeah, I'm really into this. But with the romance element, when it was that part of the film, I just found it hard to. I just didn't find it as engaging or as enjoyable to watch. You know, it's when it was weird, that was what I was liking. I felt like uncomfortable, tense. Like, where's this kind of go? You know, essentially every time the film segued from kind of the romance, you know, when we see sort of Michael Stuhlbarg and, you know, Chloe Sevigny, you know, Mark Rylance in particular, that was the film I was really enjoying. And for me, you know, I really enjoyed Taylor Russell in Waves in particular. Timothy Chalamet, I'm always a bit mixed on. I don't think he's that great a leading man. I think he's better as part of an ensemble, you know, in something like Lady Bird, for example. I find that he struggles to carry a film or be someone that I'm necessarily engaged with, which was a bit disappointing.
Interesting, because this one, I'm not surprised at the box office. It is a very tough sell, and it's a difficult one to market. I'd be interested to see how the US actually, in particular, were trailing this. If it's anything like the first sort of trailers I saw, it did seem to be very heavy on sort of Timothy Chalamet, when that was an odd choice, having seen the film at Venice and basically say, well, no, this is Taylor Russell's film. She is the lead character. Timothy Chalamet is essentially, you know, a supporting performance in this, but obviously, given Timothy Chalamet's popularity between, you know, in a certain demographic, they are pushing that forward, and it's like, how, you know, certainly the trailers in the UK have been more sort of looking at they've sort of led with the sort of with the cannibal aspect, you know. So basically every trailer I've seen has started with the scene of the sleepover that suddenly turns nasty when she, you know, basically chews the girl's finger off. You know, it's one of those ones where if I hadn't known about, you know, the subject matter, you know, if I'd just gone in blind at Venice, I would have been quite shocked at that moment when it sort of comes in about sort of 10 minutes in, and then you're like, oh wow, this is, you know, what it was meant to be like a girl who's struggling to fit in at school and stuff like that, and suddenly like, oh, she eats people. And then it's like you get these sort of audio tapes from the dad who's basically left her. He can't cope, you know, she's been doing this, you know, they've moved from town to town to town and stuff like that, and she just can't cope with it, and so he's left her on. And so you get these sort of glimpses, you get the backstory being filled in almost expositionally wise. Sometimes it can work, sometimes it can't. I think it does work in this context with via the sort of the audio cassettes and stuff like that, but it is a difficult one to judge tonally. But I think Luca Guadagnino manages to work. I think the romance actually worked for me. I did enjoy that sort of aspect. It feels like a bit like, I think some people called it like Badlands with cannibals, or like it's Bonnie and Clyde, you know, we rob banks and we eat people sort of thing, you know. But, you know, there are some aspects which are obviously very difficult. I think you have to get over the moments of ultra violence in this. Although for me, you know, it has been rated an 18 in the UK, but which I actually was quite surprised at. I was like, I would have probably given it a 15, to be honest. I almost was wanting more at certain scenes. I mean, particularly one at the end. It would have been really interesting to see how they'd done that, if they'd gone all in, bones and all, you know, as they say for that. I mean, in terms of like the performances, you know, you said at the start there that, you know, Taylor Russell, you really loved her supporting performance in Waves. I mean, what did you make of her in this? Because she won an award at the Venice Film Festival for sort of Best Young Performance. And she's been nominated for like a Film Independent Spirit Award for lead performance in this. You know, some people have said, you know, this should be a star-making performance for her. It just seems to be, whether it's the film, the subject matter, she's not getting the same sort of, you know, sort of wave of acclaim that people would expect, you know, because, you know, a lot of young adult film, you know, it's not like, for me, I've actually wrote my review, it's like a young adult romance as directed by Hannibal Lecter. You know, it's something which could have potentially broken through on, you know, depending on how it was done, like your Hunger Games, your Twilights, etc. You know, this is kind of more similar to, I guess, Twilight, which is, you know, it's a woman who falls in love with a vampire and a werewolf at the same time. But here we've got, you know, two people fall in love. It just so happens that they're cannibals.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I was kind of thinking very much of things like Raw, for example, where I just felt like that was a more interesting kind of performance. I mean, this is like it's two things that I just don't know necessarily if they gel well together. Like, like her romance, Erin and Lee's romance is interesting and fine, but it's not. I don't feel like there's much of a spark or connection between these kind of two that share, a very difficult kind of situation and so on. I didn't buy into that romance.
Yeah, I think it was more they just stuck together because they were both of the same kind, I guess, eaters, as they're referred to in the thing, which kind of leads me to sort of Walking Dead comparisons where, it's almost like humans are more dangerous than zombies and stuff like that, and it's like, yeah, they'll be fine together, but they'll always be undone by other people exactly like them.
Yeah, and you're almost waiting for that kind of moment of like, when's this big test for their, like, what's going to be the thing that goes tragically wrong that kind of sets things off a bit further. And I kind of got that impression, for example, like, what maybe kind of where the film goes in that last 20 minutes. I wish it got there about an hour earlier, to be honest. That's kind of what I want, like the the world building and what's kind of going on between these eaters. I found that just really interesting and was just kind of like screaming for more of it, and not more of it in the respect of like, you can have sometimes where you go, I don't want to be spoiled by something, as an audience member, I don't believe you should always get what you want, but that was just an inherently more interesting kind of performance, I think.
Yeah, no, I think there were times when I was sort of watching it that I felt that this could have potentially made a more interesting limited series than a movie that sort of explored that world building of the eaters and stuff like that. That if essentially it could have been like there's this central premise where she's trying to really sort of discover who she is and why she is the way she is, and so she's trying to find her mother who had abandoned her as a kid, and after giving birth, and so she wants to meet her mum to find out is she the same and stuff like that. And she does do this, but if it had been not dragged out, but efficiently edited over a limited series where they've gone from town to town to town, almost like Incredible Hulk, and sort of meeting different people along the way, I think that could have potentially been more juicy and interesting than just what we got. So I mean, one of the major sort of talking points I think that's come out of this is, while it was nice to see Michael Stolberg back playing a slightly different role to his supportive father of Timothée Chalamet in Call Me By Your Name, Mark Rylance's performance, I'm still slightly on the fence about it. A lot of people have said that they loved it. A lot of people have hated it. I know I saw one tweet today basically saying that Mark Rylance is one of the worst actors of all time. For me, I think Mark Rylance is very good in certain films. I thought Bridge of Spies was great. I thought he was great in The Phantom of the Open. When he plays slightly autistic tech giants in the stakes of Ready Player One and Don't Look Up, I find those performances very, very grating. This one was borderline for me. And I wasn't really entirely sure either way whether or not I enjoyed it as a slightly hammy, over-the-top performance, or if it just was going against, maybe purposely going against everything else that was in the film. What did you make of it?
I liked it. It's been a while since I've seen him put in a performance that I particularly really enjoyed, and this was really good. And it's. I just thought, like, every time he was on screen, because it was I think he was really very much limited to sort of like 3 scenes really in this sort of whole film. I think we probably got about 20 minutes of him out over the whole sort of 140. So there was just an element of like when he appeared, part of it's thinking, oh, he's back again. And then you get surprised that he comes. Yeah, and just like I was really interested in that kind of that character, and that was the film I wanted to see. So when he appeared, I was like, oh, I maybe wasn't connecting with this romance plot. So when it got to something like this, I was like, yes, this is the film I want. This is the story that interests me more. And I thought it was one of his better performances in quite a while. I mean, I didn't like Don't Look Up at all. I thought that was just awful. So yeah, I was really happy to see him in this, and again, it shows you why we can all talk about how great leading actors are, but something to be said sometimes about that kind of supporting kind of actor and role. And again, that's I felt he had more presence than Timothée Chalamet had in this entire film, and I thought he did very well. I can be very mixed on him, or eye roll at seeing him pop up sometimes, but this was an exciting one for me.
I came looking for you. Yeah.
Why are we talking about Sully in the third person?
For better or worse, I think whether you like the performance or you hate the performance, I think it is probably the one out of all other ones in the movie that sticks in the mind, and you're left with, and it's like, yeah, you either want more of or less of. I think that the UK marketing side of it is certainly maybe sort of, obviously, I guess because Mark Rylance is a British actor, that he features more heavily in the market, and then you would expect to see more of him in the film than you do. And I think the trailers are quite bad at giving away most of the more exciting, I think, plot elements of the story. So in that way, it does the film a bit of a disservice. But it's quite it's a challenging film, and it's not for everyone's taste. Pardon the pun. I mean, for you, were there any sort of other elements that you did enjoy? I mean, cinematography was great, but for me, I thought the Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross them working together, always a great thing.
Yeah, they really are evolving, aren't they, in terms of what you expect from their scores. It used to be something where it'd be like ominous. I always think back to those early, the Dragon Tattoo, for example. And now they're doing all these little lovely plots and some music as well. It's been fascinating to see their career evolve. But ultimately, for me, it was just one of those ones I thought, they had and perhaps then compared to Knives Out, you had essentially some, good character actors essentially sort of having, basically cameos to an extent. Some people that just had a couple of minutes here and there, and those were always exciting performances to see, but sort of undermined what we were seeing with sort of perhaps our leading performances in terms of what they were bringing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought that Reznor and Ross it's always interesting to see, yeah, like you say, like how they've started off with Fincher with sort of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and sort of The Social Network, but then can go from something like Pixar's, they do a Pixar movie and then they do a Sexy Cannibal movie and stuff like that. So I think it's really interesting to see them growing as producers, and they're not going down one particular lane. They're happy to try everything, which is great. And this one, yeah, it's like always great to see sort of like mini cameos from actors that you know and enjoy, but at the same time, it's like you're always left wanting a little bit more, like a tasting menu that is really nice to look at and taste good, but then you're left thinking, I'm still slightly hungry. So Bones and All, not gonna be to everyone's appetite, but lots to chew over and lots to digest. So that's all for this week on Filibuster. We're going to be back soon with more new releases, but until then, stay safe and we'll speak to you soon. Bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd Party.